rise for a moment of personal reflection. Thank you. The national anthem. Who do we get to sing it? Councillor Hébert or Councillor Gardner? Oh, God. Sorry. The anthem. What? Okay, I heard Councillor Hébert's reaction. Councillor Gardner, can you sing the national? Lead us.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love, in all thy sons' command, car ton bras s'est porté l'épée, il s'est porté la croix. Ton histoire est une épopée des plus brillants exploits. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Merci.
Well done.
I'd like to start by saying that we are gathering on the traditional territory of the Mohawk people of Akwesasne. Madam Clerk, roll call.
Madam Mayor Bernadette Clement.
Présente.
Councillors Claude McIntosh. Elaine McDonald.
Present.
Sid Gardner.
Ici.
Dean Hollingsworth. Caroline Hébert.
Présent.
Councillors Maurice Dupel.
Present.
Glenn Grant.
Present.
Todd Bennett.
Present.
Justin Towndale.
Present.
And Eric Bergeron.
Present.
Additions, deletions, or amendments. Now, I've had someone make a suggestion that we should move the edible landscapes report to immediately after the presentation. Is that in order, Madam Clerk?
It sure is, Madam Mayor.
Okay,
I also have a few other amendments.
go ahead.
The addition of resolutions number 1 and 2, which are in the package that have been distributed. An amendment to the presentation edible landscape, in that the recommendation will be to receive the presentation and, of course, to deal with the unfinished business report immediately after the presentation.
Okay. So I'm going to look for a motion for the adoption of the agenda. Oh, Councillor Elaine McDonald.
And I'd like to move that we take the item under consent and put it into communication, please. The bus petition.
Thank you. Any other changes? Motion to adopt the agenda? As amended. Councillor Glenn Grant, Councillor Bennett. All in favor? Thank you. Any disclosure of interest?
I have one, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Hébert?
Conflict of interest under the presentation number 2, edible landscape, and the unfinished business report for edible landscape is attached. This is a project that is under the Social Development Council, of which I'm the executive director of, so I will sit in the audience for that segment.
Okay. Councillor Maurice Dupel?
Yes, Madam Mayor, through you, I'd like to declare a conflict with item number 4 under communications, the donation of surplus office furniture, as it's a request from Community Living, and I'm employed by Community Living.
Thank you. Any other disclosure of interest? Okay. Need a motion for going to Committee of the Whole? Councillor Bergeron, Councillor Grant, all in favor? Adoption of the minutes. So there were 2 meetings, December 6 and December 10, 2018. Can we do that in one motion?
We can.
Councillor Bergeron?
Yes, December 10th, on presentation number 2, you have Todd Bergeron as the seconder. Sounds like a very cool person, but that is not a counselor. It is in fact Todd Bennett that made the seconder. I'd like to meet him.
Thank you, Councillor Bergeron. Do you still want to make a motion, though, to adopt both as amended?
Yes, if that's included.
Councillor Bergeron, seconded by Councillor DePel. Any other comments, corrections? All in favor? Thank you. First up on the agenda, presentations. Greetings.
We have in our audience this evening MPP Jim McDonald, and he wanted to salute council this evening and give greetings.
Welcome.
Well, thanks for the invitation. I was unable to make it to the night of your inauguration. We were in Queen's Park at the time, dealing with, I guess, a number of issues. But good evening, bonjour. Certainly want to bring greetings from Queen's Park and congratulate everybody on council for a successful election. And thank you for volunteering and helping out in the community over the 4 years. It's a challenge, and it's a big, it's a challenge to certainly put your name forth, and so thank you for that. We've been, I guess, active in Toronto since the June election, working to, I guess, bring some business back to Ontario, looking to make life easier. And I think that we've certainly been spending more time in Toronto than maybe is the norm over the past number of councils sitting out over the summer, and actually right up till a few days before Christmas to deal with an issue over the electricity in the province that affected everybody but people in Cornwall and an area that's served by Coral Electric. So an issue maybe that didn't gather a lot of attention here, but certainly was an issue across the rest of the province. So one of the issues I had the privilege of talking to a number of you, including the mayor, over the last couple of days and today. And we're charged with going out and looking for ways of helping municipalities. I brought up the item that we'll be asking or requesting, maybe there's not a lot of money to throw around, but there are opportunities for possibly saving money. And looking at how we can work with the municipalities to see are there records that they are producing that may be of no value. I've heard people talk about rooms of files and stories that maybe haven't been opened, but the various governments. So wondering, is there an opportunity to look at that or any other issues you have, and certainly open up to any questions you may have. So anyway, thanks for the opportunity, and I wish I'd been here on your inauguration, but unfortunately was unable to make it.
Well, thank you for those regrets, and now I'll turn it over to council. We have a great opportunity here. Our MPP is here, and we're grateful. Do any council members have any questions or issues that they want to raise at this time? Councillor Towndale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, MPP McDonald, for being here. Maybe not a question, more of a statement. In the past, you've held budget consultations, invited us to them. I'm just looking forward to the next round. I know both our governments are entering the budget season, so I'm looking forward to sitting down with you because we will be coming to you with, I'm sure, a list of issues very shortly that we look to address.
Councillor Ibarra.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for bringing greetings today. It's been recently announced that there's going to be a $15 million cut to the Ontario Trillium Foundation. Just wondering how the government is looking to reinvest into small communities like Trillium would have. So if there's any other plans to help small nonprofits or agencies that really benefit from those funds.
Well, I think over the next sometime in March, we'll be looking at issuing a budget, and really a number of the programs. I attended the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus, and our Minister of Economic Development was in attendance, and he talked about some of the programs we have, and just business support programs. There's something like 160 out there. So many, in fact, it's very hard to coordinate. Businesses are having a hard time access. So we're looking at bringing some of these down, maybe not limiting the amount of money that's there, but looking at making it easier and maybe a little more flexible, some of these programs. It was interesting because just the day before I met with one of the local groups and some businesses talking about their inability to just find out where some of these programs and what was available to them. And you can imagine they talked about the many programs and always being, not able to apply for one reason or another. And I guess I had no idea there'd be that many, but you could see the trouble people would have. So I'm hoping that there'll be another plan, and we'll see that through the budget.
Councillor McIntosh and then Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Jim, for coming tonight. The previous government made great strides in the Blue Box program, but it seems to have stalled, where they're going to shift the burden over to the people who produce the waste away from municipalities. What's your government make any moves on this?
Well, I know that in talking with Minister Phillips, they're looking at a program at reviewing the Blue Box and waste management. And I think you'll be seeing something in the next month or so, some legislation that talks about a new direction, or a revised direction, I should say, because it has stalled and it's getting very expensive. And we're finding that basically we're just filling up our landfill sites. We've been lucky to be able to export much of our garbage, but that's coming to an end very quickly. Some of the countries that accepted our garbage and recycling materials are no longer are talking about canceling those programs. So action is needed very shortly to find alternatives. So I know that Minister Phillips is doing some research now through the ministries, and we'll come up with a solution very shortly.
So the former government's plan has been taken to put in the waste bin?
The Waste Free Ontario Act, I think.
Yeah,
Sorry, if you
well,
don't mind.
the whole thing's up in,
Yeah.
for discussion, because really it was based on some things that are changing, and we're exporting much of our plastics to China, for example, and they're talking about no longer accepting them. We're exporting large volumes of garbage through to Michigan, and that's become a political issue about accepting garbage from outside the country. So all that to say, two big parts of the plan have now fallen apart. So we're going to have to look after the garbage ourselves. We have to look after the recycling, and if it makes, we're looking for ways to handle that. So there will be legislation from forth. They will be doing consultations on it and on the legislation when it's issued. And it's all about doing a better job of recycling and managing our garbage. I really question I guess the wisdom of just burying garbage. And how
Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good evening, Jim. There's two things that I would like to discuss, and I think part of our budgeting process is to ensure that we get consistent funding from Queen's Park, especially the OMPF funding. We have a hard time putting our budget together, not knowing that amount. If your government could look and say, at least there's consistent funding for the next number of years, that helps us with our budgeting process, and no reductions as well. I know that you're having financial issues, but that helps municipalities knowing that that funding is going to be there for year to year and consistent funding. And the other one is the arbitration process. I think there is, right now, we're looking at the arbitration process, and if we could look at it and put in the ability to pay in there, because some communities, when you look at per capita income, it's difficult to pay some of those arbitration awards. So.
Well, I know we tabled legislation to deal with some of the issues around arbitration, so that bill will be coming through. I believe it's 66. Don't quote me on the number, but it's looking at changes. So we've heard that, I guess, as when I was involved with municipal politics, and since I've certainly been in Toronto, I've been hearing that request from AMO and its members. So we've started that, and we've made some changes, and hopefully that'll be put in place very shortly. And as far as the funding, I mean, there's no question, no secret that we inherited a large deficit. We made a commitment as well during the election to increase the OMPF funding. So I'm quite hopeful that will be stable. Now, some of it will depend on the federal budget that comes out shortly before. Some of those programs we are not allowed to talk about until that budget's released, because they are, I guess, conditional on one another. So I know there are certain programs we can't talk about, but we are looking at different programs that will help municipalities.
I like that here, that there's a potential increase. That's always good news. Thank you.
Well, that and the potential savings too. We're looking at ways that we can, offload some costs as well.
Councillor Gardner?
Actually, it was concerning the OMPF, but also Eastern Ontario Health Unit. We've been advised that there'll be no increases for the next 2 years, although we're experiencing more and more services. We have more services to provide, and they keep adding to it, but not giving us any money. We've found ways to reduce the costs, and now we need help from the government. Health units need help from you to help us with funding. If you're going to add services to our group, then you must fund for those. That's basically, and the OMPF was the same issue I had. Thank you. Thank you for being here, and Happy New Year.
Thank you for that. Well, I think that, we are, I know Vic is looking at some issues along with budget consultations that will be going around the province fairly soon. Just kind of waiting for that schedule to come out, as well as funding is a priority for us, and health certainly is loud and clear as an issue. When I met with a number of people over the holidays, whether it be here in Cornwall or in Ottawa, hearing some of the stats of people waiting 10, 12 hours in emergency rooms, and sometimes waiting to see a doctor. And that's a current concern. So there's lots of needs out there. I know that we're adding more to mental health that hopefully may alleviate some of the programs the health unit has to fund now, or may come around that they'll be offering some of those. So there's a lot, I think, that we're trying to work on, trying to come up with some plans. And of course, really our budget document will be the first opportunity we'll have to release some of that funding.
That you bring up wait times, especially in Eastern Ontario, Hawkesbury, Alexandria, and Cornwall are looking after a lot of Quebec patients, and that's exasperating our services here, and I think that needs to be looked into.
Oh, I agree. I think that any plan we have has to be fair and reciprocal. I understand there's an issue there on that front, but I also understand we actually offer that service as a way of getting revenue, which
our taxpayers are paying for the buildings and for the service that we get, and the Quebec patients, unfortunately, are taking precedence of some of our people.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Elaine McDonald?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I thank you too, Mr. McDonnell, for being here. And I want to add maybe a cautionary note. I have heard that in your pro-business agenda, your government is considering reducing some of the regulations governing child care. In fact, allowing a higher ratio of children to caregivers, and also lessening some of the regulations governing long-term care. And I just want you to know that I think that in both those sectors we have a huge population of vulnerable people, and I hope your government in its pro-business predilection won't forget those people who need protection. And some of the regulations and the annual inspections, for example, in long-term care homes, they were devised because of incidents in long-term care homes that the inspections were meant to detect before an accident happens, for example. So I hope your government will keep that in mind, that we need a balance here, because we not only have to support business, but we have to protect people who are vulnerable. Thank you.
And thank you for that. And healthcare is a difficult one. We have a committee that has been formed to look at how better to serve the health of our people. And the inspections on the surface seem like a good idea, and they are in long-term care homes. But what we're finding is the thrust of these inspections is really to verify records, verify the documentation. And we're hearing from the personal support workers that they're spending more than half their day documenting what they do, and that time's not available to the patients. And is there a better way? I mean, would the residents of long-term care rather see the personal support workers, or they rather see them locked up filling in the records so that they can show that, yes, they did this, or, and there's a happy balance there, and it's, maybe we're better to look at a results-based, where we ask the patients themselves whether they're happy with the care, and are they getting what they want, versus documenting everything, so that there's so much time lost in records that probably nobody's ever going to look at. And so it's a challenge for sure, and that's really the case, is how can we get better care? And we have a very dedicated workforce there, and you know, I hear their complaints as well, like they're not doing anybody any good when they spend so much time documenting what they've done. And so we're looking at all angles, and I think that's one area that the group's going to look at, and you know, so hopefully we'll get more out of that as we proceed.
Thank you, Mr. McDonnell. It's tough to be in the hot seat. We've got a very engaged council, and we'd like you to come back to take some further questions from council. We're planning on doing some strategic planning in the spring, and that would be a great time for you to come back to take a look at our strategic plan and see if there's any way that the province can assist us. I do want to end by adding my voice to Councillor Grant and Councillor Gardner about the OMPF. As you know, you were at the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus, so was I, and I'm glad that you came to meet with me prior to this meeting. The OMPF is the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund for the two newer councillors around the table, and it is an operating amount that we've been receiving for years. It was usually based on the fact that we have lower assessment, and so we were able to use those funds. At one time, it was above $7 million. And in the last year, it was at $3.8 million, which is a significant amount for our community. So I want to add my voice to that of Mayor McGillis as well. He commented about that last week. We all got a letter before Christmas telling us that there were changes, so we're a bit nervous, MPP at McDonnell, and we'd like you to, you know, bring that back to the Premier to say that we continue to require that that assistance, and that any major changes would be a significant burden on our budget and consequently on our residents. So I thank you respectfully to bring that back.
Well, I'm hoping for some good news there. One of our, you know, if we're going to attract business, we have to be competitive on many fronts, and one of them is property taxes, and right now Ontario's not. So by reducing the overall funding is not helping the cause. So we're hoping to bring back good news on that. I know that just a couple of initiatives will be moving ahead on redoing the building code process in Ontario over the next summertime, hopefully having something by AMO, as well as just various options to look at reducing the approvals for large projects. I think now it's somewhere around 3 years, and that's just not, it's chasing large projects away, so we're looking at getting that down under a year if possible. So some initiatives are moving head on, and certainly we want to be open for any requests, or actually looking for information back for ideas. That's one thing we're charged with, going out to solicit proposals that will help not only municipalities but people, you know, making life easier, I guess, in Ontario. Something we ran on, and something we're hoping to deliver. So anyway, thanks very much for the opportunity tonight. Yes. And Happy New Year to all, and if anything comes up, just give us a call. We spend sometimes too much time in Toronto, but we are home at least 3 days a week. So. No, you are, and we'll invite you back. Thank you very much. Merci.
We have another presentation.
Our second presentation this evening is the edible landscape presentation, and here this evening is Mr. Alain Daou.
Welcome, Mr. Daou.
Thank you very much for having me. Okay, so members of the council, thank you very much for having me today. Again, my name is Alain Daou, and I represent the Edible Cities Project, the newly founded Edible Cities Project, which currently operates under the umbrella of the SDC. We founded the project with the goal of implementing and promoting edible landscapes within the City of Cornwall on public-facing grounds. And today I'm here to propose such a project to you. So if we can go next, please. So the goals of my presentation today, and I'm going to try my best to be brief and fit within your valuable time, but we're going to briefly explore the concept of edible landscapes. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but we are going to talk about what consists of edible landscapes and some of the general misconceptions. We're going to present an overview of the proposed project today, which we'll describe in some detail a little later in the presentation. We're going to highlight the benefits and address some common concerns that have come up during our community consultations, as well as some of our social media interactions as well. And then finally, we're going to explore the possibility of future endeavors as well. Part of my presentation is to present a pilot project, but certainly we're here with the goal of moving forward with additional projects should this one be successful. So next, please. So we're going to review the edible landscaping. So we can go ahead. Thank you. So Oregon State University describes it quite well and briefly. Edible landscaping is the use of food-producing plants in the residential landscape. It combines fruit and nut trees, berry bushes, vegetables, herbs, edible flowers, along with other ornamental plants into aesthetically pleasing designs. So when I talk about edible landscapes, and I've talked about this at length during our community consultations as well, one general misconception is that we're looking to plant annual vegetable gardens throughout town, and they're going to have to be intensely maintained by volunteers. That's not the case. Edible landscaping is more of a perennial system, so we're looking to use some natural processes and intentional design to design systems that are self-sustaining over time and require less and less maintenance as time goes on. So the cost of maintenance over time decreases, the amount of labor required for these installations decreases as the systems mature. And we'll describe that to some length here. So very briefly, the general design concept of an edible landscape is within 7 or 8 layers. So when we plant these types of systems, they usually consist of 1 or 2 tall trees. We're talking about the canopy layer. So if we look at the image on the board here, we see, in this example, we see a walnut tree. This could be a variety of different trees. In our proposed project today, we're going to be discussing, we're looking at installing mulberry trees, plum trees. These are the types of trees that will grow to a certain size and will take up the canopy of the installation. Below that, we can have some smaller trees, maybe some dwarf cherry trees, apple trees, as the example indicates here. Our vine layer will climb the tall trees, so the walnut tree supports other species, et cetera, and we have shrubs, herbaceous layers, ground cover layers, and root layers, all taking up different vertical spaces within the installation, but all within the confines of one set space. So we can plant pretty intensively. We can have quite a few things. And if you'll notice in the image, it sort of mimics, or very closely mimics, a natural ecosystem, our forest ecosystem. So what we're doing is we're actually mimicking a natural ecosystem, and we're trying to implement that intentionally to provide food, wildlife habitat, and a variety of other uses for people. And there's a lot of benefits to having installations like this within urban environments as well. So if we can move on, please. So some of the benefits of public edible landscapes, certainly in an urban area, there are many. Some of them, as listed here, they promote activity in the area. So there's nothing like a handful of berries to instigate somebody to get on their bike or take a walk down the bike lane. It gives somebody an additional reason to visit an outdoor space, which is something that I think we want to promote here in the City of Cornwall. We have a beautiful waterfront, we have beautiful outdoor spaces, and why not add an additional reason to visit those spaces? As I've already mentioned, it does decrease maintenance, so these types of installations will decrease maintenance over time. This certainly helps with the budget in some small way, because we can then install these spaces. They can be maintained by volunteers and eventually essentially left alone, and then we can continue to spread these spaces throughout town should they be successful. We do beautify areas through natural design, so there are studies, and I cite one at the end of this presentation, that indicate that natural spaces are very, very good for the human psyche. We can educate residents about urban food production, and that's something that's very near and dear to my heart. I was previously the coordinator for Growing Up Organic, which was a project of the Canadian Organic Growers, where I educated students and other youth in a variety of different locations about self-reliant skills and primarily food production. So these spaces serve as a tool and a space, a venue, to then teach these important food and self-reliant skills. And it does increase food security. So I'm by no means naive enough to think that these types of installations will feed all of the starving people in town. But certainly through education and through advocacy, we can teach the skills necessary to become a little more self-reliant. And these types of installations cross boundaries, regardless of income, age, or what have you, or physical ability. All of these installations can be made accessible to everyone within town. And so in that way, we can increase food security. Next, please. Thank you. So our pilot project that I'm proposing today is the Cornwall band shell. And so we're looking to install, if we can go back just one, please. So if you look at this image, it's a little dark, but we're looking to install edible landscaping on the east and west side of the band shell. And then there's a series of 10 raised planter boxes in back of the band shell as well that have already been moved there. And we're really going to be focusing on this one area to display some success for these types of projects. But by no means are we going to limit future endeavors to that area. But that is where we're going to be starting in 2019, pending council approval, of course. If we can move on, please. So the goals of this specific project is, of course, to prove the concept of edible landscaping within our urban landscape in Cornwall. So if this is successful, we will continue to promote and advocate for additional installations. And so this one will serve as a stepping stone. It is the pilot project. We fully intend to use this space as an educational space. We think it's centrally located. It's in a perfect area by the bike paths. We already gather there for community events throughout all seasons. And so it will serve as an excellent space for community workshops, presentations, and other events that are centered around edible design and self-reliance, which again will help bring residents to the area. And finally, it'll help beautify the area. So this is taken directly from a study that I cite at the end of the presentation, but it states that natural spaces that are both beautiful and practical have been known to have a large impact on mood, stress levels, cognitive function, and even impulse control. And that comes from a study done at Carleton University. So if we can move on, please. So down to the nitty-gritty of the installation, we have two very opposing sides on at the band shell. So as you'll see, the beds have been relatively prepped. They're empty. There's not much there. So the installation will come easy enough. On the west side, for any of you who have gardens at home, you'll know that anything on the west side will receive a lot of sun and heat, which makes it ideal for fruit-bearing plants. So we'll have fruit trees, berries, and other perennial herbs that'll function in the layer system as described previously. And thoughtful design will actually reduce and possibly even eliminate the need for water over time. So by densely planting the area, by adding in a ground cover such as clover or wood sorrel or other natural species, we'll actually occupy the ground space, which will reduce the amount of evaporation happening, which will eliminate the drying out of the plants over time as they mature. And over time, we'll see ourselves watering less and less, and then we can focus our attention on other installations should we choose to progress there. On the east side, it's partially shaded throughout the day. So this will actually accommodate more leafy greens and perennial vegetables that are more prone to being damaged by the sun. And of course, it's protected from strong winds. So careful study of the landscape around the band shell indicates that we can plant a variety of different things that will function very well in our natural landscape and in our environment. And we'll be very careful to select species that can function independent of too much human intervention. So if we can move on, please. And then finally, we have the raised planter boxes that Mr. Porter has been so kind to have placed in back of the band shell, just in back of the picnic tables, very close access to water. There's a total of 10 units, and you'll notice that they are raised off the ground, which does increase the need for watering and maintenance to some extent. They'll be used to grow some herbs, some small fruit, shrubs, maybe strawberries, things like that, and edible flowers and nursery stock. And I say nursery stock because I hope to use these planter boxes to propagate additional plants for future installations, which will reduce the cost of planting additional things and filling out the spaces should we continue to move forward with additional installations. And then sub-irrigation, which is to irrigate under the soil as opposed to the surface of the soil, and covering the soil with mulch or living plants will again reduce the need for watering. And so through thoughtful design, we can very carefully reduce the maintenance needed while still increasing productivity of the space. So what are the commitments from the community? So we are going to rely on community volunteers for bed prep and planting. That's something that's going to be done once, maybe twice, and then we'll be done because we are planting perennial species. So once these things are planted, they do not need to be replanted every single year. Again, decreasing the amount of maintenance required. And we'll be watering and maintaining the beds as well using volunteers. But again, over time, the need for that will reduce. And then finally, we are looking to volunteers to deliver some educational material through workshops or presentations at the space. And we've already had a significant number of volunteers step up for that, for all of these things and more. We can move on, please. So the project timeline for this year, for this specific project, should council approve the project at the band shell, we are going to raise funds privately for the project. The funds required, as indicated in the report, are fairly meager. So we don't require a lot of money for plant materials, which is great, and they propagate themselves. So should we continue in the future, that cost will actually continue to be reduced. Assuming that we raise the funds necessary, and I believe we will, because we do have some fundraising strategies in place, we'll have a design for the space completed and ready for public consultation by February, by the end of February. And in March, we'll be using the funds to purchase the plant materials so that we can hit the ground running in April or May in the spring and early summer, where we'll hold volunteer events for planting, preparation, and a variety of other tasks necessary. And we'll also combine some educational elements in there as well. And then throughout the spring and summer of this year, we'll be performing ongoing maintenance and some community events and presentations at the area. And in the fall, or towards the end of the year, we plan to generate a report on first-year successes and challenges that we might have had, and we'll learn and adapt from those as well. So I've listed some of the common concerns that have come up since our community consultation and afterward. The top of the list by far is, well, what about vandalism? And I think if we look at some of the ornamental landscapes and natural landscapes that we have around town, we'll see that they're very rarely vandalized. But we intend to generate so much buzz with this type of project that a high level of community engagement, in addition to the natural design of the area, should definitely reduce the risk of vandalism. That risk will always be there. But I firmly believe that in a community that participates in something like this, the bullies are eventually bullied out. Second most were insects. There were some concerns over insect pressure. What about the wasps and that sort of thing? A diversity of insects is definitely important because we are installing an edible ecosystem. This is a forageable environment. We're trying to mimic a natural process. So when you take a walk through the eco gardens, to the west of the area, it's a very natural landscape. There are insects there, but in generating a proper ecosystem design, we're hoping to provide a balance, or to create a balance of these insects, where pests will be taken care of by predators, et cetera, et cetera. So there should be no sort of unbalancing of creatures, so to speak, in that area. And if there is, that's just a result of poor design. Fallen fruit. There is some concern over fallen fruit and what that might mean, rotting fruit in the area. What about the smells and the insects that it attracts? I firmly believe that if we publicize these areas and these installations, certainly community members will be eating it as it becomes ripe, and that'll come through education as well. I think that residents will learn and understand when things are available for picking. But if the community members don't get to it, certainly wildlife will. We are installing this at the bandshell, which is close to a lot of sort of wildlife habitats and areas. Of course, volunteers will be called upon to assist in harvesting everything. So I don't think that that's too much of a concern. But if it is, that just means we're not eating enough berries, I suppose. Unsightly. So there's a concern of it becoming unsightly or seeming unkempt. Certainly, these installations are very natural in nature, and they are going to appear as a natural ecosystem. But at the same time, they're going to be installed in patterns that mimic natural processes, but that have a variety of textures and colors, and they'll be combined with some ornamental plants, so that it'll still appear very beautiful. The entire installation will be very intentional. We're not seeking to allow weeds to take over the space or anything like that. The cost, I've already touched on that to some extent, but the plant materials for a project of this size, certainly, the cost, it's not an expensive purchase. It's a very meager expense. And then moving forward as well, established plants can create additional plant material for propagation. So we can use this pilot project and other projects to propagate additional installations. And then finally, a lack of volunteer. During our community consultation, we had 40 attendees, most of which were more than happy to say that they would be willing to volunteer in some capacity. And since then, more have stepped up to indicate that they'd be willing to volunteer as well. So we can move on from there. And so looking forward, should this project be successful, should council approve, and should we all want to move forward with additional installations, we can look forward to things like edible bike lanes. An example of that has been done in Saint-Anne-de-Bellevue, where they recently installed edible landscaping along the bike lanes, which actually streamlined grass mowing because it was done between existing trees. So currently we have lawnmowers that have to go around the trees. So we can save minutes, hours on mowing by just streamlining, by creating straight lines and creating some edible landscapes there. Edible markets, so we're talking about the Village or the Pitt Street markets, which might encourage pedestrians to come down to these markets and shop at the local shops by giving them another reason to get there. And edible playgrounds, by giving children another reason to attend a playground, by giving them a handful of berries or something like that every time they can go out. So while they're going out to play on the slides, there's an additional reason for them to be there. There's a little bit of food and a little bit of education there for them as well. So we'll move on from there. So in conclusion, I'll just end with my favorite quote from one of my idols, Bill Mollison. Though the problems of the world are increasingly complex, the solutions remain embarrassingly simple. And I think there's a lot to be said about that statement. But in the end, we shouldn't discount what a handful of berries can do for a young generation growing up in Cornwall. So that is all. Before we end, we'll just move on to the next slide, please. I have a few thanks to deliver. So the Social Development Council, Caroline Hébert, thank you very much. Without her support and without the SDC support, we certainly couldn't have gotten this far. It's Transition Cornwall Plus. We have many members here today from Transition Cornwall, and they've always been a very strong voice for these types of things. Meristem Communications, Neil McMillan has been a large supporter of this project. Zach Lokes, Ecological Design, he couldn't be here today. He's based out of Ottawa, but he provided a lot of the design work and the estimates, the cost estimates for this project. And then Kat Rendeck of Allspice Solutions. I think most of you know who she is. She's helped in providing the foundation for the report that you'll be reviewing. And then, of course, Mr. Porter from the City of Cornwall. Without his help, we certainly wouldn't be able to do this as well. And that is it for my presentation. I hope I fit it within 10 minutes, and hopefully you have lots of questions for me. So thank you very much for having me. That is all.
Merci. We'll start with Councillor Bergeron and then Councillor Elaine McDonald.
Thank you. I have 4 questions. First, let me just say I love everything about this. I think anyone who knows me would know that already.
Yes.
Can I just go and eat an apple?
Can you just go and eat an apple?
Yeah, if it's growing in a tree.
Yes.
Is there a process that has to be followed?
Well, you have to file an application, and we'll review it, submit it to council.
I know the answer, but you need
yeah. So that is the general idea. The idea is that these installations are going to be public facing. So the Edible Cities project has been established to promote and implement public-facing edible landscape designs. So can you go ahead and eat an apple? We encourage it. We encourage you to eat the apple. We encourage you to tell your friends to come and eat the apple. And while you're at it, maybe learn how to prune the tree. Maybe take a cutting and plant it in your front yard and share the produce with others in the community. So yes, you can eat the apple.
Are you asking council for any funding?
We're currently seeking to match funding, so we have, I think, $1,000 committed, possibly to match the funding that we would raise privately. And I think, I'll let Mr. Porter answer that in more detail, but that's coming out of the existing tree budget, am I right?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's through the horticultural budget.
The horticultural budget,
For what
sorry.
we would be spending on plant material, planting there, and the maintenance of the beds, that's where the $1,000 would be
It's
coming.
already budgeted for.
Yes.
That's right. So there's already a budget for that, and then we're going to do a variety of fundraisers as well to raise those funds privately from private businesses and citizens to make up the rest.
Thank you. And last, if I may, can you speak about food safety as it relates to eating
Absolutely.
an apple off a tree,
Yes.
just in general?
Yeah, so there is some general food safety to be aware of. Certainly, I think the risk is lower than eating something like, say, I don't know, romaine lettuce from the grocery store. I think it's fairly safe. We're not going to be using any pesticides or anything like that. I think this goes beyond organic. We're regenerating the landscape. And so the health of the food that we'll be producing in these sort of landscapes are going to be far greater than most things you can experience in other areas. Certainly we have some excellent local farmers in the area. As far as food safety goes, I think through education we're going to sort of assist the public in understanding that sort of stuff. But if you're picking an apple that's still on the tree, it's fresh and safe, assuming it hasn't been sprayed with anything. That being said, I would recommend that the public at least rinse everything that they grab, because that's just a proper food safety protocol. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Elaine McDonald?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I guess you don't eat the worms either, eh?
No.
I think this is a wonderful project, and I'm grateful to you for doing it, for putting this whole project together, because I think it helps connect people to the land and the source of food, and it's an experience that is much easier to be had in a rural area than in a city, so I'm glad you're doing it here for us. And do you intend to involve school kids, like classes, and actually get them down there, let them get dirty? And
Yes, absolutely. Through my experience in working with schools, I see that there's definitely a demand for that type of education. And so getting classrooms out to these sort of installations is definitely on the bucket list. I'd like to get children involved. And I mean, the target audience really, when you get down to it, is youth. We want children in Cornwall to be raised and to grow up with these environments being established around them. And so getting them involved is certainly a big part of it.
give them ownership of those beds. And
That's right, to take ownership of it and to take
Excellent.
ownership of the community installation. So yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Gardner and then Councillor Dupel.
I wish I had had you around here a few years ago, because when we started having a problem with the ash borer trees,
Right.
one of the recommendations I made at that time was we replace them with apple trees. So when I saw that apple tree up there, I was really glad.
Yeah.
It's a great, exciting project, and
Thank
good
you.
for you guys.
Thank you. And I know there's been some concern with, falling fruit on the roadways and that sort of thing. We're certainly going to be very aware of that. But when we promote and advocate for these sort of installations, we're doing our research. We're going to be selecting the sites very carefully, and the same ring. There's no different with the bandshell project. It's in an area
That was an
that's
argument that was brought up
that's right.
at the time, so,
Yeah.
thank you for that. Thanks for the presentation.
Thank you.
Councillor Dupel and then Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through you. Thank you so much for the presentation. I 100% support it, and I just wanted to leave with you, I work with people who have developmental disabilities, and I know that if you could reach out to some of those agencies locally here, they certainly would be a great asset to you for volunteering with a support
Yes.
worker and going down, and it certainly shouts inclusion out to me in our community. So.
Absolutely, and part of the mission as well is to ensure that these installations and these edibles are accessible to those with developmental disabilities, physical disabilities, etc. We definitely want to make this accessible to all members of the community,
That's great.
regardless of ability. So yes,
Thank you, and great work.
Thank you.
Councillor Grant?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I support the project, and but I love the idea of volunteers, because we have other volunteer groups like the Adopt a Street program where there's 1,200 people volunteering at this time. So I believe that you will get volunteers because people want to be outdoors and they want to. What I'd like to know is how can you get rid of Japanese beetles? Because they're killing every tree I have, and
well,
especially the mulberry trees. They love them.
Yeah, that's true, and I had a problem with that this year as well in my own garden. Well, short of introducing ducks to our urban landscape, I don't think we're there yet. Yeah, I think the goal is to introduce predators. So bringing in birds and bringing in other animals, parasitic wasps and things like that. We could talk all day about the biology of it, but in establishing a diversity within an ecosystem, within an installation, that's going to bring in a variety of different insects, and so it'll prevent things from going too far off balance. When we see an entire garden taken over by Japanese beetles, often what we're seeing is, far too many cucumbers in one place. But what I'm proposing is multiple layers of multiple different plants and flowers and things that'll attract a whole host of different insects and different things that'll hopefully help balance that out. That's not to say that we're not going to experience that pressure, but we'll adapt as time goes on, and we'll design and implement new things to ensure that we have a balanced ecosystem.
Well, when you find that formula, I'd appreciate it.
It'd be my pleasure.
Councillor Bennett?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I love on your presentation, the edible bike lanes.
Yes.
I do a lot of camping in Algonquin Park, and there's a 10-kilometer trail. There's 2 or 3 that have raspberries and blueberries lining them.
Yeah.
And that's where everybody is.
And it's a beautiful thing.
And so what I like about it is it's going to promote youth and adults getting together, getting some exercise, and bringing people down to our bike paths. So I hope that's a second phase of your project, because I think it's worthwhile to get everybody involved in that, and the exercise and everything else that goes along with it.
I have my eyes on it.
And I'm going to let the lettuce in the grocery store thing slide.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I want to thank you, Mr. Daou. I was at your presentation in the fall. It was very well attended, and it was great to see the level of excitement. I think that, we need confidence, to do new things.
Yes.
And this is the kind of project that gives us that confidence. So thank you for bringing up Sainte-Anne-de-Bellevue and the different examples. It's always nice to be a pioneer, but it's nice to know that other people are out there taking those risks as well and doing things differently.
Absolutely.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So we have a report on the agenda. If you go to page 51, as a result of this presentation, City Administration has put forth a report and has a recommendation. The Council adopt the edible landscaping pilot project by donating space, partial funding for the first year of the project, and preparation of the beds by city staff. So do we want to debate that? Do we want to have comments about that? Does anybody around the council table have questions concerning that report? Because we have Mr. Porter. I know Mr. Porter has been involved with the project throughout and was also present at that meeting in the fall. So do council members have questions? Councillor Lane.
I'd like to make the motion.
Okay. Seconded by Councillor Towndale. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carried. Done.
Thank you very much.
Merci, Mr. Daou. Thank you, Mr. Porter. Councillor Lane?
I just want to commend Mr. Porter, while we have him here, for the arboretum, I believe you call it, the network of trees that you've planted in Namru Park, and I love the map you've drawn of them too, for tourists to take a walk through the park and realize what they're looking at. So that's great work. Thank you.
Take the kudos, Mr. Porter. Okay, Madam Clerk.
So our next item is the resolution number 1. Explore the reintroduction of wards in the City of Cornwall. Whereas the City of Cornwall once had a warded system, and whereas the majority of municipalities in the province of Ontario have a warded system, and whereas the reintroduction of wards has been a topic debated over the last number of years, and whereas the introduction of wards might also result in the best determination of the number of council seats. Therefore, be it resolved that council direct administration to secure the services of an expert or experts through an RFP process to study a ward system in the City of Cornwall. and therefore be it further resolved that the funding to obtain the services of a consultant be added to the 2019 budget. This was moved by Councillor Justin Towndale and seconded by Councillor Todd Bennett.
So I'll turn to Councillor Towndale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I introduced this motion in December with the hopes that we'll be able to get to it as soon as possible. It is my belief that we should go back to a warded system. I believe there are benefits to it, including elimination of duplication on our part. Right now, when there's an issue in the city of Cornwall, a resident has the option of contacting any one of us. And what we've seen is sometimes they'll contact all of us, or a few of us, or one of us, and it results in an imbalance in terms of communication. As well, some residents may not feel comfortable approaching councillors that they didn't support. We've seen that as well. But we've also seen duplication on our administrative side, where if you have multiple councillors actioning the same item, it creates, well, as I mentioned, duplication. In addition, I believe that there is the potential that some areas of the city are underrepresented. Listen, we shouldn't, we shouldn't judge someone where they live, but I believe 6 of us around the table live in the same neighborhood, whereas some neighborhoods may not have any representation. In this way, you'll have neighborhoods that can have a voice around this table, and that voice is more or less guaranteed. What I want to mention, though, however, and speaking with some of my colleagues beforehand, so I felt the best way to approach this was to look for an expert consultant to proceed with this, because I felt that we would need advice on how to proceed in terms of examples, not only from cities in Ontario, but from around the country and what they have done. Because this doesn't just determine what the wards may look like, it also determine what the size and composition of council looks like. And I felt at the time that if we were to do this ourselves, it could look at something like gerrymandering or something like that. However, I am willing, based on the comments of my council colleagues here, to amend the motion to remove the section referring to that, so we can instead direct the, request a report from administration on the best way to proceed in this regard. But I feel that if we are going to look at wards, the time is now, because it takes a number of years to get this going, and if we want this in place, or at least to look at it, to be ready for the 2022 election, we need to start the work now. And I'm looking forward to hearing my comments from my colleagues. Thank you.
Councillor Bergeron?
Yeah, okay.
You had your hand up first.
Point of
When you
order,
seconded it, I was just.
Point of order, the seconder has to agree with the
That's why,
amendment.
that was mine.
Oh, okay.
I said, point of order, I said be willing to amend it. I haven't put forward an amendment yet.
Ah,
Oh.
okay. So we're back to Councillor Bergeron.
So my question first is, do we know what the cost would be roughly of a report like that? Is that, we're putting it into the budget, does that mean it's approved in the budget, or during the budget process, do we approve it then? I just want to make sure what we're actually
Right.
voting.
Madam CEO.
Through you, Madam Mayor. I don't think offhand right now we do know exactly what that cost would be. I think we would try to ascertain what would be involved in going through that process from consulting exercise. I don't know. I might want to say somewhere between $15,000 to $30,000, depending. I'm not sure. But again, it would we determine what would be within the scope of that RFP if we're taking a look at areas as well as composition of council. So I think we'd want some time to go back and try and estimate that as well.
And any RFP would be approved by council regardless. So we're approving the idea of an RFP, not the cost of the RFP.
Correct. So right now, the instruction resolution is worded. Staff would draft an RFP document that would be issued. We would have responses. We would bring that back.
And with the idea of council seats, that's the critical part to me. Wards I know came up, but to me the size of council is more important. I have a feeling the report would be both, and I'm actually looking forward more to the size of council than the ward system. But I'll appreciate that it's one. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bennett, I think you had your hand up. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I second mostly because during the election campaign, going door to door, speaking to residents anywhere at some of the debate nights we had, it was a topic of conversation every time. And I have a job that's in the public, and so I have people coming to me all the time, and they also want to talk about the ward system. And I just want to see on how that's going to work for a smaller community. We know the bigger cities have it, but I look at the East End, and it's represent. That would encourage better representation, more even representation. And to echo the comments of my colleague here, a high number. And you know, with the conversations I've had with people, like 6 or 8 looks like a better number if you're going to use a ward system. So I'd like to see in that report different types of ward systems. There are have 6 in a ward and 1 or 2 elected at large. So there are different of a ward system. So I'd like to see that as well. I know Belleville uses one similar to that, where they have an at-large mayor, but wards, and then they have counties that are part of the city as well that are elected in their wards, but each other's wards. So I'd like to see as many comparisons as we can get. That.
Councillor McIntosh?
Well done. The idea of hiring an expert on ward systems, I don't know where do they exist. I think we can bypass that. It's not rocket science. We're not reinventing the wheel. We went ward systems to elections at large without hiring an expert to come in and tell us how to do it. I agree with Todd and Eric that the representation is the big issue here, not the ward system. You know, we're going to stick with 6 wards like the previous we have now, or we had. Do we stick with 2? That would increase council. We go to 5 wards with 2 per ward or whatever, but that's the real state. I think administration can certainly give us advice on that, but I would not be agreeable to spending money on an expert telling us how to design geographically the ward system.
Thank you.
I agree with my colleagues who've spoken against, and a report from administration, all the research that we would need on this, because an expert is going to come in with a very even-handed report. You can do it or you can't, and they're not going to take the responsibility to something. There's the implication that as areas of the city are underrepresented in terms of absolutely deny that certain areas of the city that don't have 5 councillors living there are underserviced. And this summer it came up, well, there was a charge made that there was a certain area of the city that was discriminated against, Say's department. The results of a long-term, I think, constantly updated study on the condition of sidewalks all around the city, the new ones, the old ones, the neighborhood, or that neighborhood. And I can tell you this, I think it was only 1 year ago when we had a whole sewer system put in, but north of my particular street, they're awful. But I know some of them are getting done this summer. Like, eventually these things happen, regardless of where you live. So, underrepresented, I personally answer phone calls from all over the city, and I don't say, where do you live? In fact, most people, I guess, maybe even beyond all that, I think that we're a small city, we've got limited resources. I think we spend $150 million a year, that's our total budget, isn't it? If we had a ward system for the disposable income there, and frankly, we need all 10 voices fighting for every single neighborhood in the city. Like, I would hate to think that I'm going to pit the downtown against Riverdale. No, hey, we all got bigger fish, but our real opposition is upper levels of government from whom we want more resources for everybody. Not, I want the sidewalk before your street gets it. No. I mean, our town is too small for that kind of sectional. So that's the real reason I object to wards. I think it works in a place like Toronto or Ottawa, where the city's a small town, and we desperately need to pull together for the and not work against each other, which is what some residents would expect. I think some of the system is because they have certain wants in their neighborhood, and they think if they own a council.
Any more considerations to approach rather than wards? And an expert, when I hear expert, it bothers me because they used to describe an expert as somebody that lives 15 miles out of the city. So there's no such thing as an expert. Now, so talking about wards, I know for council, and where I lived, as Councillor McDonald said, had nothing to do with geography, had to do with a person that's going to represent you, and that works hard, that answers calls and goes out and completes the task as about wards. I'm open to all suggestions, etc., but I don't like spending money when it's not necessary, so I will not support the motion as written. Thanks.
Councillor Dupel?
So think that, you know, being elected at large, you represent us, and I look forward to having the conversation on the pros and the cons about a ward and having consultation. And as Councillor Towndale spoke to me earlier tonight, he's right, the timing is now. Public consultation will certainly be important. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So just some clarification, was the motion not amended for it to be a report from administration, or is it still a consultant?
Still consultant.
Still a consultant, okay. So I certainly came prepared to speak against wards because mainly Ottawa are larger than the population of Cornwall. I looked into it, so really create a divide, and we definitely don't need right now, or ever. So I will support this if it is a support from administration, but not if it's a consultant support. Thank you.
Councillor Gardner?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I can't support her either. I was elected, and as Councillor Grant suggested, at large in this city, not in Riverdale, not because I live there. Go online and check the community. What's happening? People are lost in what they want to do. As for representatives from people in the East End, 2 in the East End, 1 in the Northeast End, I'll vote against it.
Anybody else? Sorry, I'll come back to you. Councillor Hollingsworth?
Support award system. I don't need a report from somebody from somewhere else and either, for a couple of reasons. There's kind of 2 things going on here, Your Worship, if I can get it right. Number 1, we want to have a ward, and number 2, we want to get rid of some councillors. I'm not sure exactly. So there's kind of 2 things going on, and with your indulgence, I'll kind of speak to both. First of all, with regards to the ward system, one of the things they articulated to me was that it was difficult to get things done because, of course, once needs to the detriment potentially of all the other wards. I mean, that's the nature of how, when they're sitting up in the House of Commons and in the Toronto legislature, that they're looking out for our constituency first and foremost. Now, sure, they vote en masse however the party sees to go, but their number one priority, which councillor has the most influence at that moment, at time, to the detriment of others. So certainly, if you were to try large in the city of Toronto, I'm sure you would need an election budget of a couple of $1 million. So I think we can all concede that's not happening. Drum up the same amount of, it's just a matter of desire. I mean, if you were to look at our makeup right now, certainly it's probably skewed to one particular demographic a little bit. That's just the nature of democracy. To the next election, it may go something. I don't want to spend money on a consultant. We have kind of limited resources. Whatever that number would be, 50, 80, 100, whatever the notion. The only thing I might, at best, be prepared to support is if somehow there was a motion to convince me, that would be the only circumstance that I would support this notion of going. As was already articulated in the city of Ottawa, 1 ward represents, I don't know, some 1,000. Well, if we use that as our framework, then why don't we just go to 3 councillors and a mayor, and we'll save the taxpayer. How council as a group of 8 or 6 will all of a sudden be quicker to the draw and will get projects done a lot faster, I'm not convinced. The only thing that I see happening by reducing councillors ultimately comes to the table. In other words, we run the risk of disenfranchising a small group or a large group of people because they have fewer people lobbying on their behalf. The other thing about people I can call to potentially take my issue to whomever in administration or here at the table, if I only have 1 councillor representing, I realize when people are frustrated with government, they look for something different. But here's the interesting thing, Your Worship, is the ward system isn't new. At the time decided not to do wards. Now we're saying let's go back to wards. And I don't know what's happened in the nature of our city that would cause us that those problems are still there. I don't see any evidence to suggest whatever has spurred them to come to an at-large supporting a report. as it is. So
Thank you.
Your worship.
Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to clarify my comment about being underserved wasn't a slight on the council, and maybe the person that's not so comfortable calling anybody or one of 10 or whatever, but if they had a guy that they knew they could call, they would be more comfortable to actually reach out. And it was more about engaging from that end, not the other way around. I certainly didn't want to insult anybody's intentions around this table.
Got it. Thank you. You're the mover of the motion, Councillor Towndale. Did you want to make a comment? Because I know that if you were to amend it, I think that might be contrary to the motion, but I'll turn to the clerk. If that
By removing the part that refers to an RFP and the expert, replacing that, requesting a report from administration on this topic.
Through you, Madam Mayor, because both operative clauses are very in.
I want to discuss the ward issue. I think that's a topic very worthy of debate, answering people's concerns. Place where they contact administration and get answers directly from administration. So that is something that we have to work on as a city. And I think if we did that better, we'd have fewer people saying they're not being properly represented, right? But, debate. Council size, I'm very interested in talking about that. I think when I look around Eastern Ontario, actually all of a debate from there. So I'm going to vote against the motion for that reason, but I'm looking.
It's that we can't afford it. So there's a difference between not getting an answer and liking the answer you get.
Sure, understood.
So I really don't like the comment of the guys. It was made just a moment ago that the guys around the table.
Vote for the new motion.
Justin Towndale?
Yes.
Eric Bergeron?
Okay, so does that include wards and council size?
Yes.
Right? Okay.
So all of the wording of the motion will be taken into consideration with the new operative clause of administration preparing a report.
Yes, please.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Bennett? Any further
I
Councillor?
want to comment on the.
Sure, go ahead, Councillor
You
McIntosh.
mentioned council size. Did I dream it, but didn't the previous council not vote, put it to a referendum to reduce council to 8 from 10? Mark McDonald made the motion, and I think you might have seconded it.
Yeah.
I don't believe it, Madam Clerk. I don't think it was a
If I
motion.
remember correctly, Madam Mayor, it was a report requested. The report was received. Information was provided on what that would look like, reducing, and the time.
Direction.
No motion came forward.
No.
But we did look at it.
There
We did
was a
look at it.
report.
There was a report, okay.
Obviously didn't have a huge.
Any further debate, discussion? All in favor of this new motion?
Can we have a recorded vote?
Of course.
Caroline Hébert?
Sure.
Councillors Modeste Pell?
Yes.
Glenn Grant?
No.
Todd Bennett?
Yes.
Justin Towndale?
Yes.
Eric Bergeron?
Yes.
Thank you for your patience on that one. Next one, Madam Clerk.
Is a second resolution, sidewalk infrastructure work on sub-park sidewalks, whereas the asset management plan identifies approximately 22% of our sidewalk inventory as subpar, whereas subpar sidewalks can be a detrimental factor in terms of accessibility and can also be a hindrance to pedestrian movement. And whereas subpar infrastructure can affect the livability of neighborhoods. Now therefore be it resolved that the City of Cornwall focus on the repair and replacement of subpar sidewalks as a priority, including over the construction of new sidewalks, and that this process be reflected in the 2019 budget. This was moved by Councillors Justin Towndale and seconded by Sid Gardner. Councillor.
Councillor Towndale.
Mayor, thank you. I figured I'd take up all our time tonight with motions. I'd like to thank my colleagues for taking my motions tonight. I know it is taking up a lot of debate time. However, I do feel they're important. I'd like to point out that I did make an error in my original motion. This was pointed out at the meeting in December. It's actually 22 kilometers. It's not 22%. It's more around 10% of our sidewalks. This is identified by our very own asset management that we reviewed a number of years ago that was provided to us, which identifies all the infrastructure that the city currently owns, not limited to sidewalks. It includes buildings, roadways, etc. And earlier, I believe it was late last night or earlier this morning, I sent out some photos to my colleagues that reflected sidewalks, particularly on Aberdeen Avenue and on Marlborough, to give an idea of what some of these subpar sidewalks look like. And quite frankly, they are sorry excuses for sidewalks. And you know, every year we do allocate sidewalk work. If you look in the budget book, there is a priority list of sidewalks. And as Councillor Elaine McDonald mentioned, it does cover the entire city. It's not limited to certain neighborhoods. However, as we build these new sidewalks, we are neglecting some of this older infrastructure. Some of those work is long overdue, in my opinion, and it is a hindrance. You know, Carol Barlow was here this evening during the campaign. She mentioned specifically the Marlborough sidewalk, and with good reason. Large portions of it are asphalt. It holds water, holds ice. It creates a hazard, and it's actually narrower than the average sidewalk size, not only in the city of Cornwall, but elsewhere. Other residents on Marlborough have indicated the same concerns to me, where it actually holds patches of black ice. So these are the kind of things I want to tackle, and these sidewalks do tend to be in the older neighborhoods because they've been there a little longer. So this is something I feel that is important, because, you know, we talk about the livability of our neighborhoods and how we want to appreciate every corner of the city, but if we continuously let these sidewalks degrade in certain areas and then build new sidewalks in other areas, but never go back to this issue, we're not really fixing the problem here. I do feel that we should, I use the word prioritize here. I've been told by some of my colleagues that it might be a little strong in the sense that if we use the word prioritize in this motion, we may be restricting ourselves from building new sidewalks. Not ultimately my goal. Again, and as funny as it sounds, I'm willing to amend that word to prefer or would attempt to focus on repair over new build, but I don't want to exclude new sidewalk construction, but I would like to really start tackling the problem of the 22 kilometers of subpar sidewalks in the city. And I look forward to comments from my colleagues. Thank you.
Before Glenn Grant makes amending that motion, or are you leaving it as is right now?
I'm going to do the same thing. I'd like to hear some comments first, Madam Mayor, if I can.
So it stands? Okay. Councillor Ba?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a couple of questions. So I'm wondering, isn't this why we have an asset management plan? Aren't the projects we are putting in the budget determined by this asset management plan? Aren't we already focusing on these subpar sidewalks, or do we leave some aside? I'm just wondering. I'm wondering why a motion is necessary when I was under the impression that the asset management plan was put into place so we could know what needs to be done and we are doing it.
Would you like administration to address that?
Please.
Mr. Saint-Marseille.
Mr. Saint-Marseille.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. Our sidewalk inventory, that is correct, that we do have an asset management plan. When we look at prioritizing our projects, we integrate that with our other components of our asset management plan. So we have perhaps a street, and we have a good example for a project this year that's in the budget, and that is on Amelia Street, where the sidewalk is substandard. But we also recognize that there's an opportunity there to undertake repairs to the underground infrastructure. So we will be rebuilding the street, the road, the sidewalk, as well as water mains and sewers. So we try to optimize the dollars in terms of integrating that with other projects. So that's part of our road reconstruction projects. We also have budgets through our resurfacing, wherein we would undertake repairs to the sidewalks that are substandard, so some of those that have been discussed here. And again, we would prioritize according to the need in that area, the level of disrepair, as it were, safety issues, dealing with accessibility, the width, some of those things that were mentioned, those all enter into the inventory for prioritization. We also build new sidewalks, and that's part of the budget through our active transportation. Mm-hmm. So we are trying to extend, per the bicycle and pedestrian master plan, those areas that have been identified through that inventory, and there is need for new infrastructure. Where that is undertaken, we attempt to build it as wide as possible, through the new standards. Currently it's 1.8 meters ideally, but that's not always possible in terms of the width. So typically speaking, it's 1.2 or 1.5 meters. So there's various levels that we approach our sidewalk inventory and repair and reconstruction. The fourth component of that, I should add, is through our municipal works budget, wherein there's repairs that are undertaken where there might be slip trip issues. So we would go out and shave some of those discontinuities in the joints. We would do some patching in those areas where the sidewalk is discontinuous. So there's many facets to our sidewalk repair and replacement program.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Hébert?
I have a follow-up question.
Go ahead.
If you don't mind. So I wouldn't want to see any of those strategies be lost, because I think they're all really important. I think there's a lot of work that's been done in my last 4 years where there's some underground work that happens, and then so we save money by doing it all at once. And I think this is really great planning methods. So my question is, would this motion then introduce an added budget for sidewalks? Is that what the councillor is looking for? More money for sidewalks or reallocation of dollars? So taking from maybe one of these strategies and focusing it. So really, you know, there was 4 or 5 strategies mentioned there, of course, putting less money into one and which I think are all important, and focusing on this. Or are we looking to add tax dollars? Or I guess
The question has to go to Mr. Saint-Marseille.
right. So I'm wondering how administration would tackle this if it would pass. What are they interpreting from this motion? Sorry.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think the interpretation of this is that there would be a real reallocation of dollars. So specifically, for example, in 2019, we have proposed $330,000 for the active transportation budget this is for new sidewalk construction. So if we interpret that correctly, that might see some of those dollars go to repair, and that would go under the asphalt resurfacing budget that would attempt to undertake additional repairs, if that's our interpretation.
That answers my question. Thank
Okay.
you.
Councillor Bergeron?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The Councillor Hébert kind of touched on what I was going to ask. It's mainly procedure. So if we pass this motion as is, does that mean it is therefore included in our budget, or when the budget is presented, we then vote on it? They're two very different things.
Madam CAO, you might want to take that and then.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So we would, if this was approved this evening, we would probably make those changes, or we'd have to look to reallocate some of those dollars in our budget for repairs. And in doing so, that still comes back to council. My interpretation would be the budget still gets voted on council as a whole. But what we would be doing is we're going to follow this direction to make sure it's consistent in the budget.
So administration is going to follow this direction, but as a council, we get to decide on the entirety of the budget, and that could be discussed, correct?
I would say that would be correct. I'm looking to the clerk. I think that's accurate.
In shorter terms, if we approve this, it's not law. The budget can be changed afterwards.
I think through you, Madam Mayor, potentially the budget could be changed, but I do want to, I guess I would like to let council know that we've already done quite a bit of work on the 2019 budget.
Yeah.
So we would probably prefer some direction here rather than, I mean, we could look at proposing some alternatives, but we've already kind of come up with that plan.
Thank you. That's answers my
Point of
question.
clarification sorry, if you don't mind, on some of the process that was just mentioned. If we vote on it today and it comes back to budget, and we could vote against it at budget, would we not need 2/3 majority to even entertain that motion, because we voted on that motion on this term of council, for procedural?
Madam Clerk?
Well, that's a loaded question.
Isn't it?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we don't even know what the budget composition is going to be like at this point.
Okay.
I'm not sure if council will be looking at budget as a whole, or if there's going to be a committee. So that's one consideration. And like others that have answered the question, the intention of the motion is a little bit unclear to me. It sound like one person said they took it to mean that allocation would be moved around.
Reallocated?
To me, I almost read it as that we're going to put extra money for repair. So I think the intention of the motion has to be cleared a little bit.
Okay. I'm going to go to Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And, seconded the motion because it's a shame. I went door to door and went down to Aberdeen. And 20 years ago when I ran the first time, I'm still young, that sidewalk, that paved 2.5 feet was the same way as it is now. So we can talk about road restructuring and redoing the sidewalks when we do the road, but that's 20 years ago. So I think it's an embarrassment, and we need to really take a look at getting Aberdeen cleaned up. And it's a safety issue. At the end of the day, it's a safety issue. The sidewalks aren't wide enough, and I don't think, I look at a wheelchair here, and it's not as wide as the wheelchair. So you're going to have one wheel on the side, one wheel on. It's a danger. So let's get it done. Let's prioritize the really bad ones and get them fixed.
I have Councillor Elaine McDonald, then Councillor Hollingsworth, then Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I just want to say that I agree with my colleague, Councillor Gardner, that some of the sidewalks are in terrible state. And I have to say that this is what we get for years of shaving money off the capital budget year after year after year. We want to keep that tax rate low, so we give up kilometers of road work and sidewalk work. Am I not right, Mr. St. Marseille? I mean, your budget seems to me, it's always hit. That's where we go to when we just, you know, the bank account is dry, so you get hit. So I think, obviously, to address this motion, we'd probably have to put more money into the budget. Now, I want to ask this. We tend to do whole road work, like underground, above ground, sidewalk, all at the same time because it's cost effective. If we were to isolate the bad sidewalks and just do them instead of waiting till we need to put in new water mains and that sort of thing, what's the cost differential? How much more do we spend, or how much do we save by waiting and doing the whole thing than we would if we were to simply repair a sidewalk when it needs it? And if 3 years later we need to replace the water mains, okay, then everything gets ripped up again. Like, can you give us a kind of a figure?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Part of the challenge is that every street and every repair is unique in terms of the presence of underground infrastructure, utility corridors that we have to respect that aren't ours, but whether it's gas or cable or otherwise. So every street is unique, but we do try to take the dollars that we have, and no doubt that those are limited, to try to prioritize the areas to repair. And if we can do repairs just on the sidewalk and recognize that we probably don't have to come back in another 10 years, let's say, and do a water main or do the sewer or do the road, then we will undertake to do the sidewalk.
Okay. Well, my whole feeling when I read this was a feeling of discomfort, because this is a huge item with budgetary implications, and we're not in budget yet. And I really thought this should be, I think we should, you know, what do you call that, delay this, like leave it for the budgetary process.
A motion to defer is always in order?
Sorry?
I said a motion to defer is always in order, Councillor Elaine?
Yes, because if we pull out one little part of this huge multi-million-dollar budget and say this gets prioritized, then a whole lot of other things get shifted. And I don't think the people sitting around this table have got the expertise to know how we should shift things. We can say we want better sidewalks, and I see Carol Boileau there, who's working on the accessibility committee. She's worked for this a long time, and there are others too working on that committee. But we're shortened there by our budgetary restrictions, and we shouldn't even talk about saving money. We don't save money. We stretch every dollar as far as it can go. So the question here is, I think we have to leave this for budget. And I'm also uncomfortable because it's almost getting into operations. Like, council sets policies. Yes, we want safe sidewalks. But then if we have to prioritize, this one gets done this year, are we also going to say, okay, then don't do that one, or we're going to raise the tax rate by X number of dollars so that we can do it all? Like, I think this is part of a much larger conversation, and sidewalks are probably, what % of your budget are they, Mr. St. Marseille? Like, 10%? No, much less.
Oh, much less, yeah.
So, you know, we're pulling out a small piece and building a budget around it, and that's a dangerous thing to do. Like, we have to work with the whole picture, and hopefully we'll have that during budget time. We'll be given the whole picture, and we'll work with how much of it we can absorb. And I think that's a much safer way for us to proceed than to isolate this area and say, got to fix this now.
Are you calling for a motion to defer?
I am.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Hollingsworth?
Can I speak to the motion to defer?
Yes. Councillor Hollingsworth was next on the list, but
No.
I'll be quick, Your Worship. How's that? I'll stay
I love
long.
it. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, as far as deferring, the problem I have with the motion as it is that if we say tonight, building...
On the motion to defer, yes.
But it's not talking about the original motion. A point of order, we're talking on the deferral.
Yes?
Right.
Yeah, I'm talking
He's-
about the deferral.
He is.
Reason why...
Go ahead.
How about I'll couch it this way for Councillor Grant. Reason why I think we need to defer, Your Worship, is because if we tell administration one thing, then at budget tell them something else, we kind of end up having them sort of chasing their tail, which is counterproductive. So, that being said, I think this motion, the original, would suit better once we see our budget and decide. We could conceivably, if I'm not mistaken, make a motion at budget time in terms of what do we want to do with sidewalks. So it might be better if we see what our numbers are based on the current budget that admin has put together and then proceed from there. Does that work for you, Councillor?
It has to work for me, Councillor Hollingsworth.
Well, you just seem to be able
Yeah,
to-
well, it has to work for me.
Does it work for you?
It does, thank you.
Excellent, thank you.
Perfect. I have Councillor Grant next. So on the deferral, Councillor Grant, and then I'll go to Councillor Hébert.
Sure.
Normally, when you defer, there's instructions, so it's defer for what purpose? To prolong this till the next meeting?
My understanding is it was deferred to budget process. Is that in order, Madam Clerk?
It is.
Defer to what?
To the budget.
Oh, I didn't hear that.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I'll talk against the deferral.
Okay.
Because I don't think this motion's necessary
Interesting.
Oh, at all, fundamentally, you mean?
at all.
Okay. Councillor Hébert on the deferral?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll be brief because my neighbor councillor here pretty much summed up what I wanted to say. I'm not opposed to fixing old sidewalks. I'm very pro city walkability, either it's new sidewalks, old sidewalks, but I do believe that budget is certainly the right time to do this. I'm going to assume that the budget's probably ready to be delivered to us anytime soon, so throwing this at administration to rework things before it comes to us would be all that more work that they don't need right now. So I'd be happy to discuss this once we have the entire budget in front of us and where we can see shifting, if we see it, of course. If not, then I'm pretty confident with the plan that administration already has in place for us.
Thank you. Anybody else on the motion to defer? Councillor Towndale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. On the motion to defer, I'm going to vote against it. And part of the reason I brought the motion initially and talk in relation to why I think it should be now instead of deferred to budget was because when the budget is put together, we have the projects listed with dollar amounts next to them. If we turn around and say, well, I think we should do this project instead, which is not contained within the budget, we don't know what that number is. There's not an estimate. And that means administration has to go back and get an estimate for us. And that will actually prolong the budget process and make it more complicated. My intent was, if we do this now, they have that idea ahead of time so that when the budget comes to us, they already know those numbers and it can expedite the debate and expedite these projects. So I'll be voting against the deferral. Thank you very much.
Anybody else on the deferral? Ready to call the vote?
Read the motion. What's the difference?
Madam Clerk?
To defer the motion to the 2019 budget process.
All in favor? Against? Motion carries. Thank you. Next item?
Unfinished business number 2, Cornwall Business Park update, that council will receive this report.
Business Park. Are there any questions
Motion
concerning
to
this?
receive.
The motion is to receive, yes. Councillor Grant makes the motion, seconded. Councillor DePel, any discussion on this? I have a question. The report, it says that it has 120, we have 121 fully serviced acres. Is that a good number? Should we be aiming at more? And then the other question I had was about Nick Caneb extension. You bring that up in the report, how relevant or urgent is that Nick Caneb extension? Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Your Worship. The 121 acre refers to a site that is currently available for sale, and so that particular parcel of land is serviced and shovel ready to go. And we have approximately 7 to 15 acres, depending upon how you might configure it, in much smaller sites. So a total of 130 acres, 135 acres that would be fully serviced, ready for sale right now. And then beyond that, we have an additional 260 acres that are basically run parallel to the 401 at the east end of Tollgate Road at McConnell. And that parcel of land would be serviced with truck traffic from an extension of Tollgate Road heading east, and then also connecting to the rest of the road network in the business park with an extension of Nick Caneb Drive from the Walmart logistics facility northwards to connect with Tollgate Road. As part of that particular project, to develop that road network, it would also require the extension of water and sewer services to service those 260 additional acres. And that's a project that Municipal Works has been working on. They've started some pre-engineering work on that, and we would develop those services and extend the roadway and those services as we had clients and development interest in those lands.
So it's not an urgent asset management issue at this point?
The second part of your question was, is that enough? And the question is, if we had two clients who wanted 250 acres tomorrow, then it would be urgent, because we wouldn't be able to provide those lands without servicing. Given our current rate of sales over the last decade, certainly it's not unforeseeable that within 2 to 5 years we may need to service those 260 acres.
Okay.
We certainly have interest already in a small number of land plots in that area that we are currently structuring in such a way that it will allow the city time to service the lands based upon demand. So we would entertain potential offers to purchase those lands with the covenant that the city has time to service those lands. So it's a matter of supply and demand.
Right.
We have ultimately a supply of 120 to 135 acres fully serviced land right now, which potentially could be taken up with one land sale. So we're in a good position relative to our other Eastern Ontario neighbors, and we have planned well for the future, and when we need to turn over that next stone, I guess, will be dependent on demand.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? All in favor? Carried. Madam Clerk, you're struggling tonight.
I was just going to ask you, Madam Mayor, if you don't mind, I'm going to pass it over to the Deputy Clerk.
That's okay. Please take care of yourself. Ms. Cascanet, next item.
The first report under communications is 2018 carry forwards for operation. Action recommended that council approve the carry forward of 2018 operations to 2019.
Councillor Ribad makes the motion, seconded by Councillor Grant. Any discussion? Councillor Grant, go ahead.
Right. Thank you, Madam Mayor. If you look at the bottom projects, the Rowing Club environmental assessment, I don't know where that comes from, because I think that had to do with another location that we're looking at, and so I don't think this needs to be on the listing at all.
Ms. Bailey?
Mr. Wallow?
Oh, Mr. Wallow?
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, the site that we were considering that would have required further study is a different site now than what we're looking at. And so it's possible that funds are not going to be required, although we're not necessarily sure about that because we haven't really completed that process. I would suggest that we may want to leave it in place, and if we determine that the funds are not required, because again, with the site that we're looking at, which is in the Gano Park area, there are, of course, federal lands there as well. And so, or federal or provincial, I can't recall exactly, but given that there is a government level there that may require some study, we may want to leave it in place and just take it away if necessary, if not necessary.
Councillor Grant?
It's new information to me. Right, thanks.
May I ask Madam CFO to just speak briefly about carry forwards, just in general, by way of introduction? It's a new council.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. Each year, administration brings a carry forward report to council. There's actually 2 reports. The first one is the operations carry forward. What we do is that we speak with departments, and the list you can see is on page 76 of the projects we'd like to carry forward. And they may be projects that have started, but we haven't had an opportunity to complete in this year, and we'll finish them in 2019, or projects that have not been started, but in discussions with departments, they feel that it's important to go forward with them, such as the Rowing Club project. And so we bring this list to council for approval. What we do at our year end is we contribute those monies to reserves. We pull them from reserves come Jan 1, 2019 to move forward with funding those costs associated with the projects.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner?
Moving forward to the reserves, I was looking at, on page 80, the locomotive stabilization initiative, $100,000. However, when I spoke to...
well, you're on this, Councillor Gardner, may I stop you? You're on the second report, so we have a mover and a seconder for the first.
Okay.
So Councillor Yabao moved and Councillor Grant seconded. All in favor? Now we'll go to the next report. Madam Deputy Clerk.
Next report is 2018 carry forwards for capital. That council approved the carry forward of the capital projects as listed on Schedule 1.
Councillor Gardner? Do you want to move that?
Yeah, I'll move that, please.
Seconder?
Seconder.
Thank you. Councillor Towndale.
All right. Locomotive stabilization initiative is $100,000. I spoke to Mr. DeWitt today, and he's telling me that the cost would be $151,000. Now, what is it? Is it 100,000? Is it 151? Number one, and there's a secondary to that based on property that was brought up by Mr. Peters. So, first of all, on the first question.
Ms. Bailey?
Through you, Madam Mayor, through this report, we are not able to carry forward any more dollars than already approved by council. So 100,000 has been approved by council, so that would be our carry forward. And maybe Mr. St. Marseille can speak specifically on the project itself. When that report comes back to council about the locomotive, it would say there's a $100,000 budget for it, and any other dollars, there would be a recommendation from council about additional funding required.
And to speak to Mr. Peters' land issue, we have a locomotive sitting there on a piece of land that's could be sold so quickly unless it's compromised, toxic from the Dontar. So I'd like a report on to find out if that piece of property is actually toxic, or could we sell that piece of property? And that would mean moving the rust bucket that's sitting there.
So that should be the subject of a separate request.
It's a separate subject, but it fits in with it.
But you can make a motion to that effect at some point, a new business motion, and we'll do it that way. Okay? All in favor of this one? All in favor? Thank you. Carried. Madam Deputy Clerk?
Third report is the renewal of the 2019 service agreements for child care and early years system management. Action recommended that council authorize the renewal and the signing of new agreements with all relevant early years service providers, including child care service providers, early on child and family support program service providers, as well as the special needs resource service provider for 2019. second recommendation is that council approve the process for subsidy payments to individual childcare service providers, as well as the process for distributing the 2019 allocation to the early on and special needs resource service providers from the childcare budget in accordance with the Child Care and Early Years Act 2014.
Mover, Councillor DePel. Seconder, Councillor Elaine. Any questions? All in favor? Carried.
Next report is the donation of surplus office furniture partition panels. Action recommended that the corporation donate the surplus office furniture and partition panels to Community Living Glengarry in accordance with corporate policy FIPU 03-05 as per the provision that allows surplus equipment to be donated to a nonprofit agency.
The mover and a seconder, Councillor Grant, Councillor Hébert. Debate? Councillor McIntosh, and then Councillor, oh, did you know?
Yeah.
Yes, you had your hand up first.
What's the normal procedure for dispersing surplus equipment? Do we advertise it to people, or we first come, first served basis?
Madam
Through
CFO.
you, Madam Mayor, we do have a disposal policy that we follow. The first thing we do is we offer it to other departments for reuse. And then we use a website called GovDeals. It's an auction website for bidding, goes to the highest bidder. But if there is a request that comes to administration, administration will always bring that forward to council for approval.
Yeah. My only concern here is there another local group that might be in the market for surplus furniture? Would we have any way of knowing?
This request came to us, so we're sharing it to
Yeah.
council for your approval.
Okay. I just have a little problem with the procedure. Maybe a local group might be interested in acquiring equipment, a charity of some sort, whatever. Is this going out of town? Is it? It's going to Alexandria?
It was requested from Community Living Glengarry.
Yeah, okay.
Councillor Elaine McDonald.
I didn't hear Mrs. Bailey's answer to that. What was that last bit you said?
Pardon?
What was the last statement you made in response to Councillor McIntosh?
It was requested by Community Living in Glengarry.
Yes, okay. So when I read this, first of all, I'm glad that those walls are going, because it's a sign of progress within the Future Arts Center. So my part to hang on to them. But I had a question too about the process here. So I looked up the corporate policy numbered here, and I didn't find a policy. What I found were 4 precedents of times when we were sort of appalled by the fact that we can't give any preference to a local business in procurement. But I was hoping that when we give things away, maybe we can have a local preference. So I was just hoping that something like this, part of the policy, which I couldn't find, would be that obviously local businesses might get first dibs. Did they ever get an opportunity? Like, was this posted anywhere as being available? Or how did Glengarry even know it was there for grabs, you know?
Through you, Madam Mayor, if I can maybe just from this organization. And typically, we will often present that to council for consideration. We've indicated in the report that we think that the surplus office furniture may be worth approximately $5,000 to the Bank of Montreal and took a look at the partitions. They also engaged a local individual in this organization will undertake some costs to do this. They will probably undertake, I'm not sure what the cost would be, but it says from a group. I do believe that it will be put to good use, so that it would be reasonable to bring this matter.
I think that's kind of implicit in the things we do, that we have an open and transparent process to operate it, and that works for me.
Right, so Madam Mayor, I think we just need a little bit more clarification to try and generate the highest value of the...
Any place I knew we advertised excess and this sort of thing. So if there's another place where we regularly advertise surplus, my question though, like I'm questioning the process of how we got to this point and thinking that maybe we should commit it yet to
Not committed
to Glengarry.
That's why it's before council.
Because well, no charity or non-profit or even any business buy it.
Is there a seconder for the motion to
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I really love the idea of an organization that sees a need for all of this surplus equipment. we probably want to get a more clear policy when these kinds of things in the future.
Against? It's defeated, so we go back to the original motion. Anyone else want to speak on the original motion, which is to donate it, the screens? All in favor of that motion?
In agenda, what I got was the list of previous, like, I got it kind of a list, I didn't get a policy. If there is a policy, let's write it there.
Right. Madam Clerk? Oh, Madam CFO?
It's a policy that the city has right now for obsolete surplus equipment or furnishings. I understand that we're going through a review of all of our policies. This will be one of them that we.
Okay. Or maybe we just need to fix the number here, because this goes somewhere other than to the policy. Bookkeeping problem. Okay, thank you.
Might be good to do a new business motion at some point around this issue.
Yeah.
Councillor Lane, I would suggest that. Yeah. Okay.
Proposal award for the processing and collection of recycling and curbside garbage from residential, multi-residential, as well as industrial, commercial, and institutional stops. Action recommended that council receive this report, and B, administration will bring forward a subsequent report to council as part of the implementation plan associated with the companion solid waste bylaw amendments.
Okay. So this report, this chain of office is really heavy. Sorry, a little minor comment. We certainly hear about it. So I would think that on this report, council and the public would be well served. If that's okay with council, I would have Mr. Saint-Marseille walk.
The other driver with respect to the development of the RFP is to our residents, the major components. So our current contract expires the end of March, and that contractor is an RFP, and as highlighted in the report, there are various criteria that we use with respect to the evaluation of that RFP. A component of that is cost, as page 110 of the summary of the Solid Waste Management Master Plan. So tasks that we need to achieve, and there's a graph on there that shows how the waste diversion rates would be affected as we implement those tasks. Top list of bullet points and of marketable materials through our Blue Box program, because that does two things. It actually produces a revenue stream for us. So we collect those, we market them that are at the, so whether it's a couch or a chest of drawers or a like budget requirements. Item number 3 refers to the move that we eliminate multi-res credit, wherein the city was subsidizing multi-cons, phasing out that. 2018 it was 50%, and this year it will be phased out in terms of the budget limit, looking at bag tags or clear bags. Again, Cornwall is unique in this regard. We reference for landfilling by 2030, which is the current capacity that speaks to the next elements of the Solid Waste Management Master Plan. So in here we will 50%. I said that have indicated that they would utilize, you know, friends or relatives or hire a contractor to pick up those components. So, that was important for us to hear as well. Recycle more.
Point of order, Madam Mayor.
Councilor DePel?
If we're being given a report, a large report.
Together, correct? Because if they aren't, that may change how I decide to vote on a motion to demotion.
Okay, so I'm going to have a speak.
Could I
Councillor
understand
Grant?
what the deferral is and what the instructions are with the...
Motion to defer?
Making a motion to defer. I guess, you know, having state-of-the-art equipment was all that part off the tender. We don't get to see the tender. So, I mean, they're two separate issues I see here, but that's the reason for me asking for a deferral, because I don't think it makes sense for us to just receive a report and then...
Do we still go to, is the tender going to be deferred?
Likely, but we'll have to get there when we get there. Right. But right now, we're
I
debating
realize
this
that.
motion.
this contract's up March 31st on April. We're going to vote on the tender.
Okay. To receive option 2. It is to receive the report.
Correct.
Thank you.
However,
So-
the RFP is dependent.
The price, the cost, the winner.
Cost consideration. So it's recognized.
Not what we're discussing right now, correct? We're discussing the motion
Right.
receiving this report. I would like to receive the report and defer the RFP, which is a separate motion afterwards. So I'm going to vote against the motion to defer. I want to receive the report today. Thank you.
Councillor Towndale?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Initially, I had some questions on the report, but now we're on to the deferral. So that changes things a bit. But I think Councillor Bergeron brings up some good points in terms of this would be voting to receive the report, so we're deferring a receival. But well, I can't really get into my other points because that wouldn't be in line with this motion, so I'll just end it there. Thank you.
I then have Councillor DePel.
No, Madam Mayor, my questions were answered.
Okay. Councillor Hébert?
Thank you. So, as everybody else, I'm a little confused as well, right? I would support the deferral of the RFP. However, I don't think it's going to change anything. So I'd like to take a second and talk about the RFP process. So maybe I can get, well, it'll certainly help me decide if I want to defer this or not. But I want some clarification on exactly how the RFP process works for myself and for everybody in the room. So from my understanding, an RFP is created by administration. And so criterias are set, and it's far more than cost. It's operation and staff and expertise, et cetera, et cetera. So these 7 criterias are put into place. A request goes out to everybody in the community, and then businesses and organizations or agencies who qualify can apply for that RFP. Am I correct? Right? And so they answer all of the appropriate questions with regards to cost and this and that and the other thing. And then those proposals come back to a committee of administration. And then administration reviews those applications. In this case, there were 2 of them. And there's, I'm sure, a scoring process. And then one business is more successful than the other. It doesn't have to do with price, it has to do with many other things. And so administration then takes that scoring and then brings that recommendation of either the tender or RFP, I'm just talking in general, not just this specific situation, brings it to council. We then vote to approve that tender for a purchase of services and goods or a request for proposal. We then approve it, and then it happens. So, my question is, if we don't approve it, what happens? I'm under the impression, if we don't approve a RFP or a tender, then there is a possibility for a legal matter, because we follow the tender process. The administration followed a tender process that's been in place, and so then...
Mayor, excuse me.
Yep.
Point of order. We're not talking about the tendering process. We're talking about receiving this document, deferring receiving this document.
Okay, so there was a question that you wanted to ask. Just ask it, and then we'll go from there.
Sorry, I know we're all tired.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if we just said no to this RFP or to these options, what's the outcome? Are we even allowed to say no?
Madam CAO?
Through you, Madam Mayor. So when we bring forward a tender or an RFP, council can choose to award. Council could choose to defer. If you're going to defer, we need to understand why it's being deferred. And council can choose to not award. So in this scenario, if council chose to not award, then the question administration would have is we are approaching a deadline without a contract. So if we were to go out and re-tender a RFP, it would have to be for something that is significantly different than what we've already gone out to receive proposals on.
And if we don't, then there are legal consequences,
I guess-
potentially.
I guess the question I would have is that if we've followed the proper process and we've rated it and reviewed it and evaluated it per the criteria in the RFP, we've brought forward that recommendation to council, we have followed due process and policy. So I guess I'm going to ask your question, are you asking us to make a different decision or change that outcome?
So
Right,
I-
so you cannot award, but if you don't award, then we are currently without service for that contract.
And so if we go back for RFP, we'd have to change it completely. So our option two that we all love so much, I hope, would be scrapped and we'd start from scratch. Because if we did go for the same option, then we can get in some trouble because we did follow due process.
You cannot issue a document that is, through you, Madam Mayor, you cannot issue an RFP again that is very close to what we previously had with a couple of minor changes. That would not be,
So on the deferral?
So on the deferral, I guess I will support, because I do have more questions, and I want to know, what value-added services one had over the other. These are things that I'm interested in knowing. But I feel like I need to say that in the long run, probably won't change anything, unfortunately. I feel like everybody needs to hear that. As much as we may want to change it, we might not be able to.
Thank you. Councillor Grant?
I'll speak on the deferral.
Yes, please.
I'm voting against the deferral because I studied this thing for hours. And I called up for clarification on issues that I didn't realize. I'm fully aware of the content of this, and there's no reason, I agree with Councillor Bergeron, there's no reason to defer it. Let's vote on this. If we get to the RFP and people are confused or are nervous about supporting that, that's a different issue. We're talking about the deferral of receiving a report. And I'm not going to support a deferral because I know what's in that.
Okay. Councillor Bennett? Oh, no, sorry. Councillor Elaine McDonald, then Councillor Bennett.
Thank you,
Sorry.
Madam Mayor, and I'll be quick. I don't support the deferral either because I think we have a simple opportunity here to accept a report. But does accepting a report mean we accept the theme of the report, if you will, that option 2 is the way to go?
Not necessarily.
And I'd be happy to do that because the status quo is not acceptable.
through you, Madam Mayor, I think you're receiving the report for information. So staff will be bringing back following, once the RFP has been awarded, staff are going to be bringing back a bylaw for council's feedback on further components within.
I'm ready to vote on it, so I vote against the deferral.
Councillor Bennett?
Thank you. I'm going to vote against this deferral because it really doesn't affect what we can do with the RFP process. This is for information. There's no reason to defer this. It's information. We're going to receive this today. We'll have all the information that we're going to need to make the decision on the RFP. If you want to push off the RFP till next meeting, fine. But there's absolutely no reason to defer this. It's just information. There's no decisions to be made while you're accepting this report. It's strictly information. So let's get this report received tonight. And then if you want to defer the RFP, I understand that because you want to digest this, but they're not related. I mean, obviously about the same topic, but this doesn't affect whether we vote on the RFP, yes or no. So if you're going to just receive this report for information, fantastic, let's do that. But it doesn't mean we're going to say yes to the RFP. They're two completely different motions. We need to receive this report tonight so we can move on to the RFP, if not tonight, at the next meeting.
Councillor Gardner?
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't stand up before. It wasn't out of respect.
That's fine.
Anyway, I'm not going to vote in favor of a deferral, even though I wanted to second it in order to get a conversation going. The fact of the matter is, when I went back to the first page, it says the recommendation is the council receive this report, and that's what I'll vote on.
Councillor Hollingsworth?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick question, make sure I know what I'm voting for here. So it's item number 5 under communications, correct? Make sure I know what I'm doing here. And if you look at item number 5 under communications, there's actually two components to the administration recommendation. One says council received this report, and letter B says, and I will read it word for word, administration bring forward a subsequent report to council as part of the implementation plan associated with the companion solid waste bylaw amendment. So, we're not just receiving. We are telling administration, yes, we're receiving, and go back to your offices and write a subsequent report based on the notion that we're okay with the direction you're going. That being said, Mr. St. Marseille, correct me if I'm wrong, did I understand you correctly that if we received and if we took Part A and Part B, we were also kind of committing to the RFP, that the two were tied together. Is that correct, or am I just not losing it because it's 10 o'clock at night, or what's going on?
It's literally my bedtime.
Please. with your
Mr. Saint-Marseille.
Through you, Madam Mayor, and I think the CAO had articulated that so it is a motion to receive the report, and this is not the final opportunity for council to have input, again, because there is an option, for example, associated with mandatory waste recycling, and other components of the waste bylaw that would have to be subsequently updated if council chooses to proceed with implementation or following the recommendation of the purchasing report.
Right. That being said, however, if we accept this report with item B attached, we are saying go back and reconstruct the waste management bylaw based on the contents of this report, correct?
Well, subsequent to the decision on the next report that we'll be discussing for procurement.
I guess where I'm going, Your Worship, is this. The RFP and this report are not really two separate items. They're kind of lockstep together in that two things are happening. We are saying if we receive and take item A and B, we are saying to administration, we are approving in principle, if you will, where this report's going, go back and make a subsequent report with regards to the bylaw. The second thing we are saying is that, in essence, we kind of are okay with the RFP because we've already said we're okay with what you presented. So, in essence, the motion to defer is kind of germane, in particular, especially in light of we received a couple, at least I did, a few emails of citizens who had some issues. Now, 2 weeks is not going to, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. St. Marseille, 2 weeks is not going to stop you from doing what needs to be done, correct? Like, if we waited 2 weeks, is that going to send us into a state of, or am I wrong? Again, if it's true, then tell me now. Like, if waiting 2 weeks is going to mess everything up, we should know that.
So the question is to Ms. Bailey?
It's to me, I think it,
Or
to whomever, I'm not sure who I'm
Bailey or
throwing
Mr.
it out there.
Saint-Marseille?
it is.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Certainly it's recognized that there is a defined ramp-up period associated with the contractor being in place for the continuity of service.
Yes, I understand
on
that.
April 1st. And there are requirements for capital and otherwise, fleet acquisition and the investment in the material recycling facility associated with all the new equipment that would be going into there as well. So I can't speak to the implications with respect to the contractor and how they could, associated with the delay, how that would work. I don't know. Right now, we had identified a certain schedule that we anticipate for them to work towards having an implementation for April 1st.
This is deferring for 2 weeks going to present a problem for us. Because if it is, that's fine. We should know that, right? Because then I won't support a motion to defer. If it is going to present a problem, then let's push ahead, and we'll live with it, and so be it.
Mr. Saint-Marseille, can you answer that with a yes or no?
Or is that something
not?
that, like, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, Mr. St. Marseille.
But you are.
Just, well, I want to know.
Mr. Saint-Marseille.
You know what? Don't worry about it. I'll carry on.
Point of clarification, Madam Mayor. If If we're going to get an answer out of Mr. St. Marseille tonight about whether or not it's going to put us in trouble for 2 weeks, then I go back to my point that we should have received this report a lot sooner than this agenda.
Sure.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have no further questions. I know what I'm going to do.
Okay. Mr. St. Marseille, do you want to have the final word before I call the vote?
No.
Smart man.
Fair enough.
So, the motion is on the deferral. I agree with Councillor Hollingsworth's comments about how these two are intricately connected. I don't think it's just a motion to receive. I think it has a deeper meaning. And so, even though I agree with the entire contents of option 2, putting it out there, I also am troubled by, the fact that the two are connected and that we may need more time to review. So I'm going to support the deferral. I'm just telling you how I'm going to vote, but now I'm going to call the vote. And I think I'm going to call for a recorded vote.
Pardon me, point of order, the chair can ask for a recorded vote.
Recorded vote, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor DePell.
So the vote is on the deferral of the matter.
Yep.
Councillors Claude McIntosh,
Deferral.
Elaine
Yes.
McDonald,
No.
Sid Gardner,
No.
Dean Hollingsworth,
Opposed to deferring.
Caroline Navarre,
Opposed to deferring.
Councillors Modeste Pell,
In favor.
Glenn Grant,
Against.
Todd Bennett,
Opposed.
Justin Towndale,
No.
Eric Bergeron,
Opposed.
and Madam Mayor.
As in favor.
So the motion has been defeated, to defeat,
Beautiful.
or to defer, sorry.
So we have a motion to receive this report, and we're now going to call the vote. No further debate on this. I think everybody's spoken, or...
No, I didn't.
Oh, Councillor McIntosh?
I got up, and that's when the deferral.
Go ahead, Councillor McIntosh.
It's hard.
When it comes to option A, no. But option 2, I have some issues with, I no problem with the bulk pickup. Bag limit 6, I'd go to 4. I have a problem with the mandatory recycling. Okay, so I want my garbage picked up. I don't have any in my recycling bin. I had a really good week. I was away on vacation, come back. So I go to the neighbor and I say, give me a tin can, I'm going to throw it in
Point
the
of order,
recycling
Madam
bin.
Mayor. Sorry, point of order. I thought we were just receiving the report tonight, not debating it.
Well, receiving the report means we can debate the content of it.
Okay.
Yep.
So we get it's so I throw one tin can in the garbage bin, and that gets my garbage picked up. If I don't put one in, my garbage stays at the road. You know what I do? I just take it over to the neighbor's. He's got a bin out. What do you do in tenements where there are 3 recycling bins, and the garbage guy pulls up, there's 2 recycling bins and 5 bags of garbage?
Through you, Madam Mayor, in that circumstance, as long as there was 1 unit of recycling out, then we would pick up the waste.
I appreciate where you're coming from, John, but it just seems that when you try to force people to do something, they get very creative. And I just understand why you have to have at least one article in the bin. I was always told, don't put your bin out unless you've got more than enough in to be picked up, or else save it for the next week. So we're going back now. I really have problems with that one. That's the one I have issues with. On the split back trucks, I'm not sure. That's, one guy does both. Is that what you're doing?
One truck.
One truck, one driver?
Yes.
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor. So that's, there's 1 truck, and so a component of it has recyclables that can be contained on it, and the other component is for the waste to be collected. So it's one stop to pick up the waste and to pick up the recycling.
Those trucks don't exist today?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, they do?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
okay.
And I don't know if Ms. Watson wants to elaborate
Okay,
further,
so
but
I
that's
mean,
the state of the
there
art.
are on the street today, we have trucks with split backs.
That's through you, Madam Mayor. That's not correct.
Okay.
Our current contractor uses 2 separate trucks.
Okay.
But as Mr. St. Marseille indicated, split-back truck collection methodology is not something new. It
No, no.
does exist in the marketplace.
Sure.
We just don't use that method
Okay,
currently.
so, That's my point.
Thank you. Any other comment on the report? Councillor Elaine McDonald?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And my comment follows from Councillor McIntosh's. We'll always have people who are going to game the system. You know, 1 can means you get your garbage picked up. But I'm more concerned about the bulk items. Initially, when we stopped taking mattresses, picking mattresses up, we had some people, in fact, we still do, who leave mattresses out, and I think that our solid waste department's been pretty discreet. I know a couple times I phoned and somebody came and picked up a mattress that shouldn't have been where it was. But the last instance that was brought to my attention, it was somebody who lives in some part of the city, which I don't reside, phoned, and not only was a mattress abandoned, but somebody put it in this woman's property. So now we get people who are penalizing like an innocent neighbor. So I just wish somehow, I don't know what the solutions will be, but I'll leave it with you. Like maybe we have to give people a grace period, because I thought that was terrible when somebody planted a mattress in somebody else's yard, and that person was responsible then for hiring somebody, because nobody comes for free and picks up your mattresses. You have to phone somebody. And I know in your report you say 72% of the population are confident that they can either hire somebody or get a truck to take whatever their bulk items to the dump. But for those people, the weasels, who just dump it on somebody else's property, I think we have to do something so that we're just not penalizing the innocent person who was at work and came home and found a bulk item on their lawn. So I hope somehow you can address that.
Thank you.